But I do want to point out one or two aspects of the beginnings of probation. One of these is that probation started in a very small and unobtrusive fashion. So often nowadays when we start new programs, new movements, new anything, there's a great public relations palaver that goes on, the press comes in, politicians talk, and so on. Probation didn't start that way at all. It started in a very quiet, low-key, almost unobtrusive way. This was partly, I think, because few people knew much about probation at the time, because it had been going on for juveniles, but for adults it had never been tried out, and many people said it wouldn't work. And partly, I think, because Ernie Stevens himself, who was the first probation officer, as you all know, was a very low-key person, and he didn't really go in for a lot of publicity and public relations and things of that kind. And this was probably a very good thing, because it started very low-key and very slowly. Many people have said, you know, how is it that Stevens was appointed as a follow-up officer? He wasn't, of course, a probation officer in 1942. It wasn't until 1945, when the Probation Act was passed, 3 years later, that he was actually made a probation officer. But he had been doing the work of a probation officer, serving the court that was held by Herb Wood, the senior magistrate in the Vancouver City Police Court. And Wood had been adopting a kind of probation of his own, whereby sentence was deferred, and he had been getting both the Salvation Army and the John Howard Society to do some supervising of these people. When he saw that Stevens was available, when the first New Haven closed down, he saw a great opportunity, and Stevens was appointed as a follow-up officer. But it wasn't until 1945 that probation really, as we know it, came into being, and he was then able, under the Probation Act, to appoint an assistant, and he got a secretary. Up to that time, of course, he'd just been operating in a little sort of back office with a typewriter that he had borrowed from the jail, and tapped out his own reports and so on, did the whole thing himself. So it was a slow start, and even after that, when I came to BC in 1947, this is 5 years after he had been going, there were only 3 probation officers, Ernie and 2 others. But by 10 years, by 1952, 10 years later, they had about 11 officers. 11 officers in 10 years. That's not very speedy, but I think the reason for it was that they had to sell probation. They couldn't just go out and appoint a probation officer in an area without any preparation, without having gone to that community, spoken to the people about what was intended, what it entailed, and selling the idea of probation.